I need a break. No contact. The message appeared on my phone like a verdict, short, sharp, and completely final. No explanation, no apology, just a clear, unyielding declaration. I read it again and again, each word imprinting itself on my mind, a reminder that there was no room for emotional reaction. My heart kept a steady rhythm, but my brain had already switched into analysis mode, identifying variables, assessing consequences, and preparing all possible responses. That dinner had started out normally. We'd laughed over our usual takeout, traded casual jokes, shared those small, intimate stories only we understood. There were quiet moments too, not awkward, just the kind of comfort that feels safe, stable. And then the message landed. No contact. No negotiation. No apology. Just a boundary drawn with absolute coldness. I set the phone down and leaned back, closing my eyes for a second. The room was quiet, the light from the lamp casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the city twinkled without concern. In that moment, I felt a subtle isolation, not pain. Not anger, just a clear awareness that the situation had shifted, and my strategy needed to adjust. Everything had to be evaluated. How long would this break last? What boundaries was she setting? How should I respond? Every decision from this point on required careful consideration. Personal feelings were put aside. Observation and calculation were the priority. Acting impulsively would only surrender control. The phone buzzed again. Facebook. Her mother had tagged her in a post. I opened it slowly, eyes scanning every detail. She smiled brightly, completely unaware or indifferent to the seismic shift she had just caused. Others might have felt hurt, angry, or upset, but for me, it was data. Every detail could be analyzed. Intent, timing, public reaction, underlying motives. I stood and walked across the room, looking out the window. The city below kept moving, lights blinking. Everyone living their lives oblivious to what had just happened in a small apartment on the 3rd floor. I reminded myself, nothing happening outside should force an immediate reaction. Control was crucial. Any impulsive move would cost me advantage. My mind quickly ran through scenarios. She might return to explain. She might remain silent. She could be testing my response. Each possibility required preparation. Emotions were compartmentalized when strategically useful. Every piece of information, from a message to a tagged photo, was evaluated as a variable in a larger equation. Every step I took, every subtle frown, every second spent looking out the window became an act of observation. I measured my own reactions, noted the light, the sounds around me, even subtle changes in my heartbeat. Everything became data. This wasn't about feelings. It was about logic, strategy, and control. Back on the sofa, I placed my hand over the phone but didn't touch it. No calls, no texts. Just watching, analyzing, recording. Every impulsive action was dismissed. This break, inconvenient as it was, became an opportunity to test limits, maintain self-control, and better understand the other person. The night stretched on. I walked around, observed, breathed steadily, considered every detail, the timing of the message, her word choice, her mother's attitude, potential reactions. Every piece of data was stored. No anger, no panic, no heartbreak. Only clarity, strategy, and preparation for any eventuality. And when the streetlights spilled their glow into the room, I realized one thing. The true power wasn't in reacting immediately. Control, not emotion, would decide the outcome. And I would spend this night in absolute calm, preparing each step for whatever response she might make. After reading the message, I sat still, phone resting on the table. There was no need to act immediately. Everything now had to be observed, analyzed. Every gesture, every notification, every new piece of information became data. Then the Facebook alert appeared. Her mother had tagged her in a post. I opened it deliberately, scanning every detail. She smiled brightly, completely unconcerned, as if nothing had happened. Most people would feel upset, angry, or hurt in that situation. Not me. This was information, nothing more. Her public display, her mother's involvement, everything was a veritable to consider. Why the tag? What timing? What message was she trying to send? All of it had meaning. Every detail was catalogued in my mind for future reference. I stood and paced around the apartment, looking out at the city lights. Life continued outside. The world had no awareness of the shift that had just occurred in this small apartment. I reminded myself, nothing outside should force a reaction. Control was essential. Impulsiveness would only cost advantage. Scenarios ran through my head. She might return and explain. She might remain silent indefinitely, or she might be testing my response. Each scenario required preparation. Emotional reactions were stored in a compartment only to be accessed strategically. Every post, every message, every minor signal was another variable in a larger calculation. I measured my own reactions carefully. My gaze, my posture, even the rhythm of my breathing became observed. Everything was data. This wasn't about feelings. It was about logic, strategy, and control. Returning to the sofa, I placed my hand on the phone without touching it. No calls, no texts. Just watching, analyzing, cataloging. Every impulsive action was discarded. This break, inconvenient as it was, became an opportunity to test my boundaries, maintain composure, and understand her better. The night stretched on. I moved through the apartment, observed, breathed steadily, and reviewed every detail. The timing of the message, her choice of words, her mother's tone, potential reactions. Each piece of data was stored. No anger, no panic, no heartbreakingly clarity, strategic thinking, and readiness for any eventual outcome. And yet, the more I observed, the more I realized control wasn't passive. It required active attention, careful calculation, and patience. Every post, every tag, every silence had a meaning, and it was my responsibility to decode it, not to react blindly. This was a game of information and timing. Every choice I made now could shape the path forward. By the end of the night, I felt the same steady calm as before. Nothing had changed outwardly, yet internally I had catalogued, measured, and prepared. Control remained in my hands. And I knew when she made her next move, I would be ready. Not emotionally, but strategically. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, falling on the wooden table where my phone lay quietly. I sat there, sipping coffee, eyes fixed on the cup, while my mind ran a constant analysis. Her message, the tagged photo, every word, every action carefully examined and weighed. No rush, no agitation. Everything was data. I began outlining my options: call, text, or maintain silence. Calling could show concern but risked pressure or conflict. Texting could create tension or reveal emotions, weakening my position. Silence. Silence was power, but only if I controlled it. Otherwise, she might misinterpret it or vanish completely. I paced the apartment, running through each scenario. If she returned with an explanation, should I listen or maintain distance? If she stayed silent longer, should I be patient or take initiative to step back? Every scenario was analyzed carefully, weighing potential outcomes and impact on me. Maintaining control without letting emotion drive decisions was critical as I walked. I realized an important truth. Emotions weren't the measure here. Logic and strategy determined outcomes. Every minute, every action, every message or social media post could shift the balance. I had to be ready for everything from her returning with a sincere apology to disappearing entirely without a word. At times, part of me wanted to act impulsively, to call immediately, to demand answers. But I reminded myself, impulsiveness meant losing control. I breathed deeply, looked out the window, observing the light, distant traffic, and my own heartbeat. Everything was data. Then there was her mother, the one who intervened by tagging her post. Her actions added complexity. Outside interference could affect her mindset while providing additional data to analyze. I noted mentally how her mother behaved would influence her next move. Scenarios ran continuously. Through my mind, if she reached out, how should I respond to maintain advantage? If she remained silent longer, how should I hold power? Every step, every reaction had to be carefully calculated. I began visualizing each detail: tone of voice, expression, text phrasing, timing everything predicted and prepared for. I returned to the sofa, hand over the phone, not touching it. No calls, no messages, just observation and analysis. This break, inconvenient as it was, became an opportunity to test my limits, maintain composure, and understand her and her mother better. I catalogued every detail, every gesture, every post, every comment. Everything was valuable data. The night stretched on. I paced, breathed steadily, reflecting on all details: timing of the message, word choice, her mother's tone, potential reactions. No anger, no panic, no heartbreak, only clarity, strategy, and preparation for any eventuality. I made plans for each possible outcome: her returning with an explanation, continuing silence, or disappearing. And the more I observed, the clearer it became. Control wasn't merely silence. It required awareness, strategic calculation, patience, and precise observation. Every post, tag, and pause carried meaning. My responsibility was to decode them, not react emotionally. This was a game of information and timing. Every decision now could change the entire dynamic. As the sun set, the apartment remained quiet. I closed my eyes, breathing steadily, observing every small detail. Everything was data, every possible outcome accounted for. And in that stillness, I prepared for the next move, ready for any scenario she or her mother might set in motion. One thing became clear: power didn't come from emotion. It came from the ability to choose, control, and act precisely. That day, the apartment was still, yet the atmosphere felt heavy, almost invisible. I sat by the window, staring out at the blinking city lights, feeling as if the world outside was indifferent to the tension inside. My phone buzzed a new message from her. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I sat still, taking a deep breath, observing my own reaction. Heart steady, senses sharpened. The message was short. Don't know what to say. No apology, no explanation. Every word, every pause carried meaning. I read it again and again, not angry, not desperate. This was data, crucial data, to decide my next move. I began analyzing. Was she hesitating or testing my silence? Was the vague message a sign she wanted to reconnect, or just a way to check my reaction? I reasoned. If I reacted impulsively, she would gain the advantage. If I remained calm, in control, the power stayed with me. Part of me wanted to call, to hear her voice, to understand her reasons. But I reminded myself, emotion couldn't dictate actions. Impulsive moves would cost me the upper hand. Instead, I replied with a short, cold text, neutral but measured. I'm here. Nothing more. Enough for her to know I received it. But still in control. Moments later, my phone buzzed again. This time, an Instagram post from her, an old photo, smiling brightly, captioned casually as if nothing had happened. I didn't feel jealousy or pain. I examined it carefully, her eyes, her smile, the angle, the timing. Every detail became data to assess her mindset, intentions, and possible next moves. Yet, I wasn't a robot. Fleeting feelings of longing passed through, but I locked them away. They couldn't influence decisions. Silence had become power, but only effective with absolute clarity and composure. I continued observing, imagining every scenario. If she wanted to reconnect, how would I respond to maintain advantage? If she kept her distance, should I maintain my silence or make a small move to test boundaries? Every tiny detail, from text phrasing to social media interaction, was analyzed carefully. Night fell, and the apartment grew quieter than ever. I returned to the sofa, hand over my phone, but didn't press anything. Every action had already been calculated. Each step, each reaction, each moment of silence. In the stillness, I felt power rising not through words or hasty actions, but through control, observation, and readiness for any scenario. And as the streetlights spilled their glow into the room, one thing became clear. The drama didn't just come from her or her mother. It came from how I chose to act, control, and decide. Silence was no longer just strategy, it was a test, a game of intellect, where each step, each reaction, determined the final outcome. The next day, the apartment was strangely quiet, as if the whole world were waiting for the next move. I sat at the table, sipping coffee, staring at my phone without opening it. Every notification, every buzz, was evaluated as a critical variable. Silence was still power, but now it began to create an invisible psychological pressure, not just for her, but for myself as well. Part of me still felt emptiness, a fleeting pang of longing recalling past moments. But I reminded myself, these feelings had to be controlled, not allowed to influence strategy. I started outlining possible scenarios for today. If she reached out, how should I respond to maintain control while also understanding her intentions? If she remained silent, how far should I push the distance to test boundaries? That afternoon, the phone buzzed. A new message. I want to meet. Short, yet every word carried layers of meaning. I sat still, analyzing. Was this a genuine attempt to reconnect, or just a test of my silence? Once again, I chose not to react immediately, taking a deep breath to observe my own response and think through the optimal course of action. The moments of waiting sharpened my mind. I imagined every detail, Her eyes when she saw me, her tone, each question or explanation that might come. Everything was prepared in my head, no emotion allowed to interfere. This was where real power emerged, the ability to observe, predict, and control every variable. I decided to meet her, but on my terms. Not too close, not overly friendly, just enough to gauge her true intentions and attitude. She arrived, looking outwardly calm, a forced smile, but her eyes betrayed tension. A small part of me noticed she was anxious. I only observed, revealing nothing. Every gesture, every moment was analyzed. The conversation unfolded slowly, each sentence measured. I didn't rush, didn't argue, only asked concise questions and listened. She admitted her awkwardness and confusion, explaining why she needed time alone. No excuses, no blame, just honesty. I remained calm, noting and observing her tone, her movements, her eyes, her breathing. Everything was data. Then a small but crucial turning point appeared. When I asked about continuing or ending things, she paused for a few seconds, her eyes uneasy, and said, "Still have feelings, but I don't know how to handle everything." Just one sentence, but enough to shift the entire dynamic. I reminded myself, this was not the moment for emotion. Analysis and logic remained the priority. The meeting ended. We left in silence, but with a subtle difference. I knew that everything had changed. A new turning point in our relationship had emerged. Silence, observation, and strategy had kept me in control. Yet a quiet awareness settled in. This relationship would never be simple again, and every future move would require careful calculation. That night, sitting by the window, watching the city lights blink below, I realized that true power lay in maintaining composure amid emotional peaks, and every decision, no matter how small, could change the entire outcome. The next day, the atmosphere felt heavier than ever. I stood in front of the mirror, looking into my own eyes, calm, cold, yet beneath the surface, a complex web of analysis unfolded. Every possibility, every potential reaction from her, her mother, and myself was carefully catalogued in my mind. This was the day when every decision would lay the foundation for the ultimate outcome. The phone buzzed. A message, "We need to talk." Just 4 words, but enough to activate every bit of data in my mind. I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I sat still, taking a deep breath, observing my body's reactions, heartbeat, breathing, the subtle flutter of anticipation, all framed in logic. This wasn't about emotion. It was about strategy and control. The meeting was arranged at a quiet cafe, where natural light streamed onto wooden tables. When she appeared, the forced smile was there, but her eyes no longer carried the confidence of before. I realized she was weighing every action, every word, against my possible response. Every step, every gesture was data to analyze. The conversation began slowly, each sentence carefully measured. She tried to explain the months of silence, the tangled emotions, and why she needed time for herself. I listened without interrupting, but every word, every inflection was analyzed. Every expression, every glance, every movement became critical information. I didn't rush, didn't smile, didn't frown, observed and took note. Then came the decisive moment. She asked directly, "Do you still want to continue with me?" I held my gaze, silent for a long beat, letting the question hang in the air. In that instant, power didn't come from words, but from absolute calm, the ability to control, and the foresight to predict her reaction. Finally, I replied, I'm not deciding right now, but I am observing, and every action you take will inform that decision. Short, cold, yet clear. I wasn't swayed by emotion, logic, and strategy ruled. She went silent, eyes uneasy, a few seconds stretching endlessly. At that moment, I recognized a crucial shift. She was no longer in control of the situation. From now on, every action had to be carefully considered. This was the turning point. Power had shifted entirely. Throughout the meeting, I observed every subtle cue. How she sat, how she placed her hands on the table, the pauses between words. Every detail was noted. Even the silences, the quiet breaths, were analyzed. Hesitation, tension, or a test of my reaction. The meeting ended, and we left the cafe without another word. The surrounding space was quiet, but unmistakably different. I knew this was the critical moment. She realized the strength of silence, and I maintained control. Emotions were present, but they didn't dictate action. Strategy and logic were priority one. Back at the apartment, I sat by the window, hand on my phone, watching the city lights blink below. Every second, I reviewed the meeting. Words, eye contact, gestures, breathing, all data. I realized that this climax was not the end, but the most important turning point, where every action and reaction from both sides would shape the final outcome of the relationship. A quiet awareness settled in. True power doesn't come from words or rash actions, but from remaining calm, observing, and analyzing every high-stakes moment. From this point on, every step, every reaction had to be executed with meticulous precision. The next day, the apartment remained quiet, but noticeably different. No more anxious waiting, no fleeting nervous flutters. Instead, there was absolute composure, as if all the data, all prior actions, had formed a clear map of the relationship. I sat by the window, hands on the table, city lights reflecting on my face, thinking through everything that had happened, every message, every meeting, every glance, every silent moment was analyzed again. Emotions that had briefly flickered, pain, unease, confusion, were now just information, data to draw conclusions from. Power no longer came from testing each other through silence or messages, but from the ability to maintain self-control, observe, and make wise decisions. She texted, I think we should have one final talk. To make everything clear, I replied, fine, but this time, everything must be transparent, and I only want the truth. Short, cold, without emotion, but crystal clear. I had prepared myself for any possibility. She could try to justify, display emotion, or remain completely silent. The final meeting was set at our familiar cafe, where the afternoon light gently fell on the wooden tables. When she appeared, no forced smiles, no anxious glances. Instead, she carried calmness, though a careful watchfulness lingered in her eyes. She knew I had observed, and every move would be noted. The conversation began, slowly, deliberately, word by word. She admitted her true feelings, why she needed her own space, and the mistakes made during her silence. I listened, remaining silent, observing only, no reaction. Every expression, tone, gesture became the final dataset for evaluating our relationship after a long moment. I made my decision. I value what we have, but from now on, everything must be transparent. Otherwise, distance is necessary. I won't lose control or let emotion dictate my actions. Short, cold, but decisive. This was the final turning point. Power and absolute composure belonged to me. She paused for a few seconds, eyes uneasy, then nodded. All tension, all unspoken implications were resolved through honesty, calmness, and logic. No resentment, no tears, no emotional explosions. Only composure, observation, and clear understanding of the relationship's nature. Leaving the cafe, we walked in silence, neither speaking much. Yet the air no longer felt heavy. I realized that true power doesn't come from manipulating or testing someone, but from the ability to control yourself, analyze, and make timely decisions. Emotions still existed, but now they were placed correctly, as data, as experience, not dictating action. Back at the apartment, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Every moment of the relationship played in my mind, but instead of pain or regret, only a sense of absolute calm and inner power remained. Every future action would be guided by logic and observation, untouched by emotion. Finally, I understood that this story wasn't about winning or losing, nor about fleeting feelings, but about composure, analytical thinking, and self-control, the very factors that determine the outcome of any complex relationship. And I knew that no matter how things changed, I would always retain power and calm in any situation.